Okay, so it's 3 after. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the New Mexico Family Advocacy Program's 39th ECHO session. NMFAP is a model of respondent parent representation being implemented in the 13th and 2nd judicial districts that utilizes interdisciplinary teams of lawyers, social workers, and parent mentors working effectively together to provide quality representation and the advocacy and support families need for reunification or other preferred outcomes in the child welfare system. I'm Leslie Jones. I'm one of the lead attorneys, and I'll get things started today. Helping us for IT support is Jen. Jen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, you know me, Jen Vieira with the AOC. If you have any technical issues during the session, let me know. Otherwise, make sure you're on mute when you're not speaking. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Today's topic is the state of child welfare in New Mexico, legislative updates. A few reminders so that we know who is with us today. Please enter your name and email address in the chat. Also, please fill out the post-session survey, which is an integral part of our program's data collection efforts under the federal grant. The survey will only take a few minutes of your time. Jen will post the link to the survey in the chat box. Thank you in advance for your feedback. So our presenter today is Representative Gail Chasey. Gail Chasey serves in the New Mexico House of Representatives, having been first elected in 1996. During her time as a representative, she championed the repeal of the death penalty passed in 2009 and sponsored legislation to accommodate pregnant workers, eliminate filing fees for victims of domestic violence, end discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, and expand community corrections. She is currently the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, helping to usher important child welfare and related legislation through the legislative process. Since graduating from the UNM School of Law in 2008, Gail has been a sole practitioner, and since 2013, she has been a contractor with the Administrative Office of the Courts, dedicating her practice to abuse and neglect cases. Gail has been an NMFAP practitioner since its origins as a pilot program in Sandoval County and continues to be an advocate for the practice model as a member of the Family Representation Commission. Before I turn it over to her, just our learning objectives today are that the participants will gain a basic knowledge of child welfare related bills introduced during the 2021 New Mexico legislative session. Participants will gain a basic understanding of the legislative process, including how bills move or do not move through the legislative process, how bills are affected by the political process, and how to track the progress of legislation online before, during, and after the legislative session. And participants will gain an overview of the outcomes of 2021 child welfare related bills, including those signed or vetoed by the governor, and how to access that information, including veto messages online. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Gail. Thank you very much and welcome, Gail.
Thank you, Leslie. And let me apologize in advance. We have workers at our house today, and there may be some dog barking in the background. I wanted to say, although I was introduced to Representative Chasey, I would really not want to be addressed that way by you guys. You're my colleagues, but you can do it if you're in front of the House Judiciary Committee. That's fine. If you're testifying, then you can say that. I'm hoping to keep this somewhat informal, and I got a list of bills here that some of which were reviewed by the Children's Court Improvement Commission recently, and then I added some of my own. But I was thinking there's a bill that's not on here, and I just want to call it to your attention because it was in the special session when we legalized recreational cannabis. And Antonio Roybal Mack and Jeanette Cordova, who works for her, figured out that there was a section of the legalization bill trying to respond to criticisms that we might not be keeping children safe if we legalized recreational cannabis, that talked about what happens if somebody has cannabis and children. and actually would have changed the burden of proof in child welfare law. And thank goodness, because nobody caught that except for an outside person like yourself. So the more people like you are informed, the better. And I do want to say that my experience in dealing with the legislature began when I was the director of a community program for young children with disabilities. And in 1985, we passed the law to implement public education for 3 and 4-year-olds with disabilities. And I realized then that any citizen of the state can have a voice in our legislature. And it's not just because we're the only unpaid legislature in the country, it's that we're fairly accessible. The trouble is that we don't meet that often, and our sessions are brief. We make mistakes. We don't get things done that should have gotten done. And that certainly happened this year, to our frustration with the Family Representation and Advocacy Act. But so I wanted to tell you a little bit about what this is. The table in front of you has bills that were introduced, a little bit about them, where they ended up, and some comments about them. So there'll be ones that'll be particularly interesting to you, but there are others in this category of child welfare legislation that were not on our radar as practitioners in the abuse and neglect field. The first one there is House Bill 183, eliminating fines and field fees for juveniles, because this was a hardship actually on the families of kids in the juvenile justice system. And I was the co-sponsor on this bill with a freshman legislator, Representative Montoya. And this was a very rare occurrence in this session. There were unanimous votes on this bill in both the House and the Senate, and it was signed into law. One of the things that really helps is that in this particular case, this was a bill that was chosen by the clinic at UNM School of Law as a project. So a lot of law students were working on getting it passed as well. So that was very, very helpful. I think that the next one on the list, House Bill 202, is to essentially was to implement the reforms that were in the Kevin S. settlement. So a lot of the advocates, I see Betty Fleshman's on our call today, and Betty was an advocate for this, Pegasus Legal Services for Children, and some of the attorneys for the plaintiffs in that case. And it was introduced by both Democrats and one Republican in the House. And we're trying to put into statute what the settlement was seeking. And it really what the agreed upon settlement is. There was a lot of pushback from the Human Services Department and CYFD, essentially asking for more time to implement the reforms that the law provided for them. So this bill started in the House. It's a House Bill 202, and it only made it through one committee before it came to the House Judiciary Committee. And let me just tell you about the Judiciary Committee, since we're all attorneys or we work in the legal system. In both the House and the Senate, we have a number of attorneys who advise us. I have a staff of, we have 4 attorneys who are committee analysts. Then we have the House majority, the Democrats hire 2 attorneys for the House Judiciary Committee. The House Republicans usually have at least 2 attorneys for the House Judiciary Committee. They just had 1 this year. But the committee members, if you're a Democrat, you get the committee analysis and you get the Democratic analysis. And the Republicans get the Republican analysis and the committee analysis. So the 4 attorneys for the committee, we try to have folks who know a lot of things. They know administrative law, they know civil law, they know criminal law, and they're very talented people. And they are taking the feedback from the various agencies, the Attorney General's office, the state treasurer, the administrative office of the courts, and then they are putting those, putting that feedback into the analyses that we read when we are getting ready to vote on a bill. So what the deal is with House Bill 202 is that it was not that anyone disagreed, or that anyway, none of the Democrats disagreed with the goal of House Bill 202. It was that Human Services and CYFD were saying, we want to do this, we just can't do it on this timeline, and if you could give us until next year. And Betty, you might want to chime in here. I'm not sure if they asked us. We didn't. Sometimes when that happens, what we can do is put a delayed implementation on the bill, and then we can get buy-in from everybody. But apparently we're not able to do that. But for a bill that important, only to have made it through one committee in the House is somewhat disappointing and unusual, because I think of the level of support that it actually has. In House Bill 209, that was Representative Georgine Lewis, who is an attorney who's also a native of Acoma Pueblo. And so it was to implement here, or to enact an ICWA statute here in New Mexico. Her bill made it all the way out of the House and over to the Senate, and through one committee, and then it got stalled in Senate Judiciary. Interestingly, there was a duplicate bill in the Senate, and that bill did not move out of Senate Judiciary either. So the judiciary committees in both bodies don't necessarily agree with one another all the time. Oh, I see, that's a duplicate. The Senate bill was 278, but it also got stuck in Senate Judiciary. And I would like to, let me see if there are things in the chat here, but if anybody has questions, I'm fine with people raising their hands, and I can try to answer those as we go. The next bill, House Bill 284, was a very controversial bill. There was a Senate bill which I understand had the same goal, but it was not a duplicate exactly. It did not move in the Senate at all. In the House Judiciary, the House Bill 284, had made it through the Health and Human Services Committee. However, the chairman of that committee, Debbie Armstrong, was not present at the time that it went through that committee, although there was another attorney, Democratic attorney on that committee. I wanted to just explain that I think there may be some reasonable ideas in this. And as I spend most of my time, at least 2/3, maybe 75% of my time battling CYFD as a respondent attorney, but these, what this bill did, and Leslie Jones called me when it was in my committee, and I was avoiding having a hearing on it because I had the analysts were telling me, the legal analysts on my committee were saying this bill has a lot of problems. Essentially, what it did is it gave, I think the thing that was the most difficult for me to swallow is that it gave a right of intervention to virtually everyone, a right of intervention to foster parents, school counselors, CASAs, it was just, it really was not useful. But there is a very vocal group of foster parents who had advocated for this bill. And what I find troubling is they have been pushing legislation to be able to intervene. The first time when I saw their first bill in 2017, they wanted to be able to intervene whenever the foster parents decided they wished to adopt the children. They wanted that to be intervention by right into our hearings. They wanted intervention by right when the department was moving for a trial home visit. They wanted intervention by right when the child was going to be placed with a relative. So what their goals were are contrary to our law and practice, and I think our US and state constitution, and essentially don't support reunification or they don't. It doesn't support our law or our practice, and our practice needs to move more in certain ways, as we have advocated in this program. But we will hear more from them in the future, and I found it difficult to speak with my colleagues who were co-sponsors who were freshmen to help them understand, because we were doing so much of this virtually. So it was a very difficult bill. And I was hearing from guardians ad litem in our system saying, oh, you have to pass this bill. And I emailed one back, one with I know personally for years, and I said, I have problems with CYFD, but this is not the answer. Please read the bill. Because people oftentimes will advocate for or against a bill without having read it. So then we go down, the guardianship changes were developed by the Children's Court Improvement Commission, but that particular bill, Senate Bill 97, Senator Lopez, that didn't make it out of Senate Judiciary. Now, Senator Lopez did a great job on the next two bills, which would have been very helpful to us. The Family Representation and Advocacy Act made it all the way through the Senate committees, the Senate floor, the House. I am not sure where it went before Judiciary, but let's see. But it made it to the House floor calendar, and there should have been enough time for it to pass the House. But here's what happened to that politically. On the Senate floor, the Republicans introduced an amendment that required every attorney to advocate for the best interest of the child. And Senator Lopez explained that that's the job of the guardian ad litem, and the court has that in mind, but the respondent attorneys cannot have that, take that position in the cases, although sometimes I certainly feel like the advocating for the parent is in the best interest of the child, but that's kind of splitting hairs. So they had to defeat a floor amendment that would have done that in the Senate. Okay, so then it made it over to our side, and we had one of the sponsors of the House Bill 284 prepared a floor amendment for Senate Bill 127 to do the same thing the Republicans in the Senate tried to do. That would not have been a problem to prevail on tabling the amendment on the House floor. What became the problem is that it didn't make it to the House floor calendar until about 4 days before the end of the session. And because we were doing the virtual session, we couldn't negotiate in person. And that what was happening is that the Republican caucus, which is I think 25 in number, and so they don't have enough out of 70. They don't have enough to prevail, and so they just slow things down. And so we have a 3-hour limit on debate, and it got to the point toward the end where their choice was to just debate every bill for 3 hours. So this is where the political comes in, and it wasn't that this bill wouldn't have passed. It's just that we had to get it going, and we thought it would be an easy one to pass. And I had Justice V. Hill, and I was carrying it on the House floor. We had Justice V. Hill and Judge Delaney on. Literally, we were waiting until 1 and 2 in the morning, thinking it was going to be the next item on the calendar. And then we started encountering the slowdown by the House Republicans, and the dam finally broke like on Thursday night before the session ended Saturday, but they refused to agree on any bills for which amendments would be proposed. And so we just got locked out. And the governor, I believe, will put it on the call for the 30-day session. And it will be appropriate to do so. And if you notice under Senate Bill 127, it says Senate Joint Resolution 11. That's actually a constitutional amendment, which it requires more of a vote. You have to have a constitutional majority in both chambers, and then it doesn't go to the governor, but it goes onto the ballot. So that we did that when we created the Law Office of the Public Defender. So that's what our thoughts were, that we want to get the constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2022. That can be introduced in the 30-day session, even if it's not on the governor's call. So we have 60-day sessions where anything can be introduced by any legislator, but in the 30-day, it's a budget session. And so we can have budget items, or it has to be on the governor's call. And so we will probably be able to do both of those things in the next 30-day session and just try to get it through quicker. And the next bill, Senate Bill 196, was a Children's Code Reform Task Force that Senator Lopez sponsored, and she actually had money in the budget for $500,000, I think, to do some rewriting of the Children's Code. And it could be introduced in the 30-day, arguably because it has a fiscal impact, especially if it's $500,000. But we would try to get that on the call again as well. The next item is the only other one on this list that passed both chambers, and that is the the Citizen Substitute Care Review Board changes. That's going to. I've given you some links at the bottom, and this whole thing will be available on our website, but this is how you can get to reading a veto message. So here's the veto message from the governor on Senate Bill 242, because that did pass both chambers. And primarily, she said, it prematurely expands the authority of the council without any appropriation to implement its new power to accept, investigate, and negotiate solutions with CYFD. And I think another sort of not very positive comment is that the Native American communities were not consulted regarding Senate Bill 242, even though the council must adhere to the Indian Child Welfare Act. So the governor's asking for additional collaboration, and before that this would be enacted. So that's a, you know, it's not a scathing indictment or anything, but it certainly is clear what would be necessary to get that put in place. Senate Bill 247 was sponsored by Senator O'Neill, had worked on it for a long time, but Senator Cedillo Lopez took it on at the end, and then Representative Andrea Romero. And what has happened just like for the last 20 years is that the Supreme Court's been weighing in on the fact that some juveniles were sentenced as adults, and essentially what's happened is that they've been, because they're never given a review, they're being sentenced to life without parole. And that was never contemplated for juveniles. And in fact, there was a decision from the Supreme Court indicating that states really better change this. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Supreme Court reversed years of precedent in this area. And what this bill would have done is not guarantee parole. It's not guaranteed, but it would have required that after 15 years, there must be a hearing. And that's all it did. And the opposition to that was substantial. And yet there was a lot of support for it. We did have the votes, and it was on the House floor calendar, but in the end, it didn't make the list of ones to pass without debate. And interestingly, when the Supreme Court reversed years of precedent in this area, a lot of the newer members who vowed to respect precedent just tossed it out the window. And interestingly, one of the member who was during his hearing was brought to task for some of his behavior in his adolescence. Essentially, he wrote the opinion and said, basically, you're responsible for everything you've ever done as an adolescent. And even though we know that there are brain changes and there's a possibility for redemption and so forth. But this is one that we hope we can take past anyway. And the Supreme Court, we need to do our own New Mexico statutory overrule of that decision. Senate Bill 257, that particular bill, let's see, was sponsored by Senator Michael Padilla and Representative Phelps Anderson, who's a Republican in the House. Oh no, he changed to an independent this year. But it created court and related procedures to allow 40 entitlements for out-of-home youth placements. It's not one I had heard anything about before. It didn't get very far. I don't know that it had been studied in the interim, but that sometimes the bills that do better, like that make some progress, like Senate Bill 247 had been worked on in the interim, the life sentences without parole. The Citizen Substitute Care Review Panel had presented to the Courts, Corrections, and Justice Interim Committee the Family Representation and Advocacy Act. Obviously, there was tons of work in that. It started with a memorial, a joint memorial from the House and the Senate. So it gained a lot of traction. And so it kind of starts the ground, hits the ground running, that's what I want to say. Same with the no fines and fees for juveniles. So the other one, Senate Bill 324, was a product of the Children's Court Improvement Commission, developed to revise law enforcement roles. And I think what it did is made changes for protective custody for what are so-called short stayers. So they are kids who aren't in custody for a long time. Now, at the bottom there, where it says find legislation, if you click on the legislative link, newmexicolegislature.gov, and there's a whole menu where you can look for bills, you can look for legislators, you can, there's a what's happening, and you can tune in on a committee hearing at that time. And one of the things I wanted to show you is how these analyses work. Just a second here. What you're going to hear a lot of from, if you listen in on a hearing, or if you're interested in getting something passed, you're going to want to know what the fiscal impact report is. They call them the FIR. And we have a finance committee, and we have the finance committee it's made up of legislators, but it has a huge staff of economists, and they do the same kind of analyses that that the attorneys for my committee do. And so they'll tell you, well, this is going to require this many staff people at the Department of Tax. This is going to require this many folks. The courts say this is going to cost $2 million a year, and they'll essentially give you an analysis of what everything costs. And what I gave you there is a link to House Bill 202, which was the Kevin S. reforms bill. So if you click on that link, when you check on the website, I think it won't be posted until after today, but when you click on that link, you're going to see what, because the Legislative Finance Committee analysts will have gotten a report back from Human Services, a report back from CYFD, a report back from maybe probation, parole, from the Department of Health. And it looks at whether the system can support the bill that's being proposed. So what you want to do is look at those things and see what folks are trying to weigh when these bills are passed. So I think what I'd like to do is, oh, you're going to, oh, there you are. Okay, good. You've got there we go, House Bill 202. So thank you. That was really good, Jen. I appreciate that. So they don't know how much it's going to cost. If you look for the fiscal years there, it's going to be a recurring expense, and it's going to affect the general fund. It's not coming out of some specific taxes. So the responses they heard from the Administrative Office of the Courts, Aging and Long-Term Services, CYFD, Early Childhood Care and Early Childhood Education and Care Department, Governor's Commission on Disability, Human Services, Indian Affairs, Law Offices of the Public Defender, and Office of the Attorney General. And so then it'll go through as you're seeing there, a synopsis of what the bill does. Just keep going on down here. It was a pretty comprehensive bill. And what often happens with a bill like this, and it did happen with this bill, is the bill's introduced. The very first committee, they made so many changes to the bill. Usually it'll be at the request of the sponsors, or the analysts for the committee will point out things that need to be done. So the very first committee on this one did a committee substitute. So they sort of like rewrote the bill, and then it passed that committee. Then it came to House Judiciary, and based on the analyses, the preliminary analyses by the Democratic analysts, that Republican analysts, and the committee analysts, we did another committee sub. And that was the bill that failed in the House Judiciary Committee because of, as I as I suggested, the Human Services Department and CYFD really thought they couldn't get it done. And I really would like Betty to comment a little before we put this one to bed, because she worked really hard to get it passed. And I did not quite think we were going to have trouble getting it out of House Judiciary. I thought at that point it was late enough that we might have trouble getting it all the way over to the Senate and through the Senate. Betty, can you comment on this?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for your help getting it scheduled. It was amazing in and of itself. So the group that put it together, we're part of a Kevin S. implementation team, a combination of people that brought the lawsuit. And it's actually, we're actually formal. We meet with the co-neutrals at least quarterly. Any of the deliverables that the department produces, we review them before the co-neutrals do. So we were a little disappointed because the only things in there, this is a 3 or 4 year implementation, to be realistic, of what some of the changes that need to happen. But the ones that were in this bill were the ones that were already, the deadline had already been met. So we disagreed, just to put it mildly. There are other implementations for every year, and our expectation was that every year we would add in, after the two departments had implemented them, the co-neutrals who they kind of like special masters. They're co-neutrals instead of special masters, because we never actually went to court. We were able to settle it. So that we'd come back every year, and once those years' deliverables have been done, add that into the statute. And the reason we never went to court is because everyone agreed. It was a new administration. It was filed under the past administration, and the new secretaries from both departments came to the negotiations and said, we agree. We don't want to have 200 kids out of state. We don't want, all these things that are going on. We don't want kids over medicated, things like that. So we're a little disappointed. We don't always agree. I mean, negotiating and implementing these things are difficult. So we will be back next year. We have not spoken with the two departments yet, but we will before. Hopefully we can come before your Courts and Corrections interim committee to discuss this more, to get a little more buy-in, because we absolutely don't want to put into law something that hasn't happened yet, or put the departments in a position to implement things at a faster pace than's realistic. For example, like the ICWA law was also part of the settlement, that ICWA is important. There needs to be a state ICWA law. And then of course that is a couple years, because it can take a while to pass through the session. And the reason to put it in statute, and I was not around 30 years ago, but some people were, there was a Joseph A. class action lawsuit like 30 years ago. And with that team, they really fixed it up apparently and got the things working really well. And then that team left and everything got totally dismantled, all the great efforts that were made. So the real intent is that these changes that absolutely everyone agreed to, which includes an ICWA unit, which includes an ICWA law, which includes kids not being sent out of state unnecessarily, stays that way, even when a new administration comes in. So we hope to be in front of you in your interim committee. Hopefully we'll have a little more buy-in and we can move this forward. And it will take a couple years to codify all the agreements in that settlement. Thank you.
You're on mute, Gail.
Now, I was unmuting myself and I accidentally left the screen. So I just, there was something that came to my mind about that. Oh, on the ICWA bill, when we had the House floor debate, I'm just talking about the politics a little with that, the House Bill 209 that made it over to the Senate. There are some Republican members who are aligned with this, the group of foster parents I mentioned to you, who basically think when children come into care, they're probably better off if they get adopted by some competent parent. That's just the bias. And so there was some kind of talk along those lines during the debate. And it did not, I made a note for myself what the vote was here. It went pretty well. I'm not finding it. I think there were maybe there were 13 or 15 votes in opposition. It wasn't straight party line, but there were no Democrats who voted against the ICWA bill. And there were none who voted against the Senate Bill 127, the Family Representation and Advocacy Act. Just a few people after the Republican members tried to amend that bill so that the best interests of the child would guide all attorneys. Once that was removed, only a few Republicans voted in opposition to the bill. So I would like to take questions and from folks and get a little feedback on what else might I tell you that would be helpful.
So Gail, I was going to ask you, just because there's different levels of people that have varying experiences with the legislative process. When we see some of these bills that sometimes go around on emails, what's the best thing that we can do? Should we be putting pressure on our representatives?
Well, when you get a bill from folks whose opinions you trust, you can go to the legislative website and find out where the bill is and who's on the committee that's going to hear it next, and send an email to those members, the members of the Senate or the members of the House on the next committee, if you have that level of information. That's really what you want to do. Of course, you want to tell your own senator and representative that you like the bill. But early in a session, when I start getting emails about Senate bills, I can't even concentrate on them. I mean, I can, if it's, say, the anti-trapping bill on public lands, that was a bill I got a lot of emails on, and I supported that bill. And so I could say, oh yes, that's fine, I'm going to vote for that. But when I would hear something, say, about a water bill that started in the Senate, as a House member, I don't know if it'll ever even come to my committee and committees. I'm on the State Government Elections and Indian Affairs Committee also, and the Rules Committee, but I don't relate to it as much as if it's on the agenda for my committee that day. So it's helpful. You can look up where the bill's been assigned by going to the website, and you look up the bill, and you'll see how it reads as introduced, and you'll see what committees it's referred to and where it is in the process. And if you have any questions at all, you can ask me anytime if you're trying to figure out where it is. But then email the members of the committee, even if you're not one of their constituents. I think it's not a bad idea. It's best not to send canned emails that are all the same, because you tend not to read them. I mean, we had the bill to end the abortion ban, and we had hundreds and hundreds of emails on both sides of that issue, all similar. Those against express the same sentiment, those in favor express the same sentiment, and you just don't have time to read them. But if you can, I think I see Brian Ray's on this meeting, and Brian always comes up with really interesting ways to interpret the law and and really, I wish I had more time to hear him say, you should change the law this way. In fact, Brian, I invite you to tell me, because I'm going to be retiring from doing these cases, and I'm going to have actually more time to try to help get the law better. So one of the supervisors said, so I'm so sad you're leaving. And I said, well, I'll be able to do more for you when I'm not at your beck and call. Like, oh, there's a hearing today. Okay. So anyway, that will be, I can certainly try to get things done that we've all hoped could get done. But do stay on it. Follow the action. One of the good things about having a mostly virtual session is we had a lot of participation online from very far away folks, like lots of people from Hobbs testifying on the bill regarding sensitive information for migrants and publishing that. So that was really good. I think we're probably always going to try to figure out a way to allow for that kind of input during a session, because it was excellent. We're going to start having in-person interim committees in July this year because of the public health orders being lifted. So the committee, I co-chair a committee on courts, corrections, and justice. So we're going to have a hearing on the Kevin S. Implementation. I know that for sure. We promised Betty, and I've got it. I've told our staff attorney on the Legislative Counsel Service that we definitely need to do that. So we will be looking at that. We typically have a criminal justice reform subcommittee on of that committee as well. We're going to have a shorter interim this year because we have to do redistricting. Ordinarily, we do redistricting in September, but because the data from the Census Bureau has come in so late, we're probably not going to be doing redistricting until early December. But it does cut the number of months that we have interim committees a bit. So we may not get as much done or have as many meetings as we ordinarily do. But you're just always invited to those. The committee schedules are published on the legislative website. And we do get, like, because of the FAP program, we do get notice of bills that we are interested in, either those that are bad or good. So do follow up with your elected officials.
And just to follow up a little bit on what you were saying, do you think it's going to be a hybrid type model where, they'll allow people to participate online?
During the session next time or during the interim?
Both.
Okay, during the interim, I think that we just had one meeting on this topic, and the Legislative Council, this is the committee that works on figuring out logistics. We don't have it planned because we're going in person, we didn't have virtual planned. Whether or not we can do a hybrid during the interim is kind of an open question right now. Typically, for example, Indian Affairs Committee goes to really remote places. So it's possible that we won't have broadband coverage for that. But in order to try to be with the tribes, we go to really inaccessible locations to meet. And whereas like courts, corrections, and justice, we may meet mostly in Santa Fe or Albuquerque, so we might be able to do that. We did discuss the fact that it's going to be easier if we're at the Capitol, because then we have some technical support. I think when we meet here at UNM, and they do have a place at the south area down by the stadium, or down across the street from CNM, they have a good meeting room that a lot of committees use. I think UNM might be able to facilitate that so that we can have virtual participation. But if it's in Albuquerque, you can come by for the hearing, you know. And we do have published agendas and schedules, and there's always a joke about legislative time because we're always running late. But it's because we try to let everybody have their say. Frankly, I had in the House Judiciary Committee, when in the beginning of this session, when we had a meeting that was only 6 hours long, that was a short meeting. By the time we took public comment and the members finished filibustering the bill that was going to pass anyway. Yeah, we didn't have short meetings in House Judiciary, nor does the Appropriations Committee, or it can take a while.
Gail, I have a quick question for
Sure.
you on the family representation bill that got through a lot of steps. I believe that you said it was going to come up in the special session or the 30-day session.
I think we can, not the special, the 30-day. I'm hopeful that we can get it on the governor's call so that it can be considered in the 30-day session and get it going fast. And I have to tell you that all of the attorneys who were the analysts for the House Judiciary Committee complimented the sponsors of that bill. And we know who did this work. They said that was the bill that needed the least correction of anything they'd seen. They're the brains of the outfit. I don't claim to know as much about every bill that comes through my committee as the analysts do, because they have taken it apart. The analysis that we saw on the screen, we're getting something like that from the committee for us before we vote on it.
I know that that's probably one of the bills that biggest impacts us. So
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I know that what we'll do sometimes when a bill has passed a chamber, let me give you an example. National popular vote is a way to, if enough states sign on, every state that's in the compact will promises to go with the popular vote winner. And then you can actually essentially do away with the Electoral College without, if we have enough states signing on to the national popular vote. That particular bill, Senator Mimi Stewart had passed it in the Senate like 3 times, and it had never made it to the House in time. We hadn't had a debate on it. So what the National Popular Vote Committee organization said to her is, you need to start the bill in the House next time. So I ended up carrying the bill. And once we got it through the House, it flew through the Senate and the governor signed it, and it's law in New Mexico. So if we had any concern that the House was a problem on that bill, we could start it in the House. But the House really isn't a problem on that bill. It was just the one member on the House floor who is kind of with that foster parent group. So I don't know that we need to change it, but we do look at that. Those of us who don't, I don't care who gets credit as long as it gets done.
are there any other questions for Representative Chasey? We do have the link for the survey, so if you can please take the time to fill that out. There's also the last questions in regards to additional trainings that you all would like for us to put on for you all. So if you can please help us with that survey, we'd really appreciate it. Any other questions?
It's not really a question. I would just like to thank Gail for your amazing advocacy and service for all the years. I've known you for years and different roles in my life. And
I know.
you just amazing. I mean, you really advocate, you know, when the public shows up, you make sure everyone has a chance to speak. I've seen you educate your colleagues and move them in your direction. So I don't think we thank you enough. It is great. You're not my legislator, but I feel like you are. But I just wanted to say thank you, and I hope you're not retiring from the legislature.
No, we'll see how
Okay,
that
good.
goes. We'll see how redistricting goes.
Good.
No,
Well,
but
thank
thank
you.
you very much.
Definitely going to be missed as an attorney, I'll tell you that much.
I'll miss you guys too. We'll see. I'm going to do at least a year of just the legislative stuff and my family issues, and then we'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you, Representative Chasey, and thank you, Gail, for everything and for your willingness to do this.
Sure. It's nice to see you all.
Yes, thank you, Gail. This was like a super fantastic crash course for people who have not lobbied or haven't done anything like this before. I thought it was great. As someone who does regularly do stuff like that, I was like, she is hitting all of those points. She's very clear. The questions were awesome. Yeah, I thought the advice was good. So thank you. And thank you. It's been an honor to work with you. We've known each other for a long time, but it's been great.
Yeah. Well, I figured you'd chime in if I was getting anything wrong, because I know you will, because you do it and you know how to talk to the legislators too.
Yeah, I was going to say to everyone, find bills that you like, that you're passionate about. That is, I always think that's a fun thing to do, right? It doesn't just have to be the things that are associated with work. Last year, I was asked to support the Crown Act, which was an act that was passed to end discrimination, hair-based discrimination. And that was so much fun. And because everything is online, like Gail was saying, you can go to these things. It's really easily accessible. And if you get the chance to go to Santa Fe, do it, because the energy is incredible. They always have these different days that you know, celebrate different things in New Mexico, or different groups of people. And so you can go, you can be a part of that experience. You can go visit the offices. It's really exciting.
I forgot to mention, NMCAN always has a big presence there, big presence at the legislature. They have a breakfast, and you know, the kids are really good people. You know, the hard-nosed people who won't help on anything else, really happy to see those kids. So everybody really is welcome.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. That ends today's ECHO session. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you again next month.
Bye.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.